Is Star Wars Shatterpoint being overshadowed by Warhammer 40k? That's the question for today. I personally think the answer might be yes, and that's unfortunate. So for those of you who don't know, Shatterpoint is coming out early June. The date currently escapes me, but it's very early June. I think it might be like the 3rd. And Warhammer 40k, well, we don't actually know the exact release date yet, at least I don't personally, but that is expected to come out in summer. We might get a release date for that at Warhammer Fest. And is the fact that Warhammer 40k is getting a new edition, the 10th edition, is that actually drowning out a lot of the hype for Star Wars Shatterpoint? My personal answer to that is yes. Now, there's no real way I can quantify this. It is indeed very subjective. What we do know is that when it comes to tabletop war games, Warhammer 40k is by far the biggest game. The size and reach of Warhammer 40k is truly insane. Now, you might not necessarily appreciate that because you might think, well, Star Wars is a much bigger IP. And you would be right, Star Wars is a much bigger IP. Like, there's obviously films and TV series and that kind of things. Warhammer 40k is getting, I believe, now some films or TV shows with the Amazon deal, but, you know, it's not in that league when it comes to the IP. However, it is so ridiculously huge and it dwarfs pretty much everything else when it comes to the hobby side of things. It was much, much bigger than everything else. It's much bigger than Age of Sigmar. It's much bigger than Star Wars Legion. Much bigger than X-Wing. It's the biggest game out there. Warhammer 40k is to wargaming what D&D is to role-playing games. Now, if you're into that niche, you might be more familiar with the other games, like Legion, but if you were into D&D, you may be familiar with some alternatives. The only one I even vaguely know is Pathfinder and Warhammer Fantasy, but I'm sure there's probably more. So the fact that we're in here, and the fact that we're in this niche, I think skews our opinions and our views a little bit. From an outside world, Space Marines are the de facto hobby when it comes to wargaming. It's just completely on a different level. Now, whether or not you accept that, fine, you know, there's not much I can really prove it to you. But what we do know is that they're both getting releases at the same time. And I'm not going to call the game similar, I think they're completely different. 40k is typically on a 6x4 board, although I think they actually shrunk it so it might be a little bit smaller. Shatterpoint is a 3x3 game with like 8 miniatures per side. 40k you probably need, what, 40, 50, 60 miniatures? I don't really know exactly. I'm sure you can probably just get some massive titans and probably field like 3 minis, but that's not really the default. Whilst the miniature scale is somewhat vaguely equivalent, the games are going to play completely differently, feel completely differently, and the IP is obviously completely different. But the fact that they are dissimilar in that regard, I think is almost irrelevant. My key point here is that I think there'll be some people who were considering getting into Star Wars Shatterpoint who won't because of the new edition of Warhammer 40k. Anecdotally, I've had that told to me by a couple of people now. Does that make it true? You know, I can literally not quantify it. But personally, I feel that if the Shatterpoint release was at a time where there was no other big release being talked about by GW, they would probably have a more significant hype window. The hype for the game would be higher, interest would be higher, and they'd probably get more people to at least buy the starter box. Now, what should AMG do about this? Well, the reality is nothing. I don't think they can go ahead and delay it now. I think like Australia, some people have already got the core set in Australia, so the cat's out of the bag a little bit. All that they can do, and all that they probably should do, is to just keep going and plow through. I do question AMG's marketing and timing though. It was pretty obvious that a new edition of Warhammer 40k would be coming this summer. That's just the cadence that they tend to do. I think it's every 3 or 4 years. I can't remember the last time I looked it up. I personally feel like they should have tried to avoid that window. Now, maybe there's some like production issues and stuff like that. Obviously, I'm not in the business side of things, I don't truly know. But I think they should have deliberately tried to swerve 40k new edition. I think that just would have been the sensible thing to do. But as I said, the deal's done, it's coming out. And they should probably just persist with it and keep going. Now, how much does this matter? So for me, not really very much. Yeah, it'd be nice if like the hype was higher and I got loads of YouTube views. That would be great. But it's not really what I make my decisions on. I learned a long time ago that really I need to just concentrate on what I'm interested in. Otherwise, I very quickly sort of lose interest. Now, that being said, my interest currently is not actually in Shatterpoint or Warhammer 40k. It is instead heading towards Warhammer The Old World. That is the nostalgia game for me. That is what got me into the hobby. That is what got me into wargaming. So for me, my heart sort of lies there. Now, this is a little bit of a shame because I'm not sure what I'm actually going to do with Shatterpoint. We've now had the rules. The rules look great. I've read the rules as much as I can be bothered reading them, and I'm very happy with them. The core book looks fantastic. The game looks fantastic, if I'm honest. And I can tell you right now, if I wasn't in the middle of trying to make a Warhammer The Old World army, Shatterpoint would be absolutely right up my street. But I am a little bit time short. I'm not blessed with time at the minute. Therefore, I might make the hard decision to not actually buy into Shatterpoint at launch. I've not decided yet. There's no writing on the wall here. I'm not claiming to definitely this be the case, but it's something I'm currently considering. Now, however, I'm sort of like going a little bit off topic there, but it just shows that even though Shatterpoint might be a great game, there'll be people getting distracted by GW. Yes, I'm getting distracted by a different GW game, but I'm still distracted by it. Anecdotally, it's only my channel, but I have a Warhammer The Old World channel, Always Strikes Back. That channel tends to get more views per video than say this one when I'm talking about Star Wars Shatterpoint. Now, obviously the Old World is more sort of developed in a way. There's a lot of old players coming back. There's the games and stuff like that. But this is Star Wars, right? Star Wars is still a massive IP. People still play Legion. And, you know, I can imagine there being a lot of hype for this game. There's also the fact, and I just sort of mentioned it there, Star Wars Legion. There are people butting heads talking about how Star Wars Legion and Shatterpoint may compete with each other. I still get comments, some people being a little bit salty that I said I was quitting Star Wars Legion for Star Wars Shatterpoint, which I completely stand by. If I was going to play either game right now, I'd be playing Shatterpoint for a variety of different reasons, not because Star Wars Legion is bad. But you have two, or you will have two active Star Wars games, tabletop war games, similar sized miniatures, but with different sort of intended purposes, I guess. Star Wars Legion is supposed to be the sort of like more mass battle 6x3. Shatterpoint is your 3x3 skirmish game. It's going to be quicker and a bit more sort of like objective based, cartoony based, if you will. But the fact that they're competing with each other, I think that is actually a bit of a problem as well. Now, people will say, well, what about Kill Team and 40k? Well, number one, Kill Team and 40k actually use the same miniatures, so the competition sort of doesn't matter to GW as long as they're selling their miniatures. But GW will often compete with themselves. Now, the difference here between Games Workshop and Atomic Mass Games is that Games Workshop is just so much bigger. The popularity of their games are generally just bigger than the popularity of Star Wars Shatterpoint, so they can afford to compete with themselves. Now, it's not all doom and gloom for Star Wars Shatterpoint. I do not want to put it like it's all bad. As I said, the game actually looks fantastic. I think the rules look great. Blackjack Legacy's put a video while he's excited, and I've got to agree, I was watching it, I was like, yeah, man, these are some good reasons to be excited for this game. I think I may jump in when we get the original trilogy stuff. I am more excited about like Luke and Darth Vader than say the Clone Wars stuff. I know that's sacrilege, but what can I tell you, that's just the way I feel. But the fact that they're competing with themselves, I do think is a bit of a problem when you're not as big as the big boy. There's one thing that's not really relevant to this topic, but one thing that does sort of put me off Shatterpoint, and I've mentioned it in a couple of different videos at this point. I don't really like the fact that the factions can sort of play with each other. So you can have the good guys and the bad guys, the new stuff with the old stuff. Obviously, you can't mix within the squad, but you can have two squads and you can have one from the old stuff and one from the new stuff when we actually get that stuff right. And I really don't like that, not just because of the logic of it, because I actually think in Star Wars there's generally a good lot of examples you can give where the good guys and bad guys team up. Like, I sort of get it in that regard, but simply because it puts the mentality in my head that I need to buy everything. It's a little bit like FOMO. Now, I know you don't need to, but spending habits and logic often don't go together in this hobby. Now, the difference with, say, like Star Wars Legion, I can just play Empire. Yes, I might never be the best team or the best army at a convention or a tournament or something, but I can probably make the best Empire army if I wanted to. And I'm okay with that. The same way it'll happen with fantasy. Not even like a cost thing, it's more of a mentality thing for me. I don't like it. I understand why they've done it. It's going to make them more money. And if we're honest, that's the same reason they're actually going to make Shatterpoint a different sort of scale to Legion. It's going to make them more money. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. But on the other hand, I think this game will be very much akin to like Marvel Crisis Protocol. I sort of feel like it might be bigger than Marvel Crisis Protocol in the long run. The Star Wars universe for me, I just think has something to it that the Marvel one doesn't. Maybe that it's more suited to this kind of game. I don't know, something in my head says it is. But then Marvel seems pretty decent as well, so who knows? I don't really know. But the rules look good. The miniatures look fantastic. I think the game's going to be very well received. Everything looks amazing. I just feel like they're sort of taking the edge off it a little bit by releasing when Warhammer 40k is getting its 10th edition, even though the games are completely dissimilar. I just think you're going to get people, and I've sort of heard that it's happening, they're going to say, well, I was going to buy Shatterpoint, but actually 40k is getting a new edition, man. Whoa, whoop, 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 hype, hype, hype. And, you know, that makes sense. It's the biggest game out there. For me, really don't like the aesthetic, really don't like the lore. Just not into it. I can't gel with it. There's bits I sort of find okay, but yeah, it's not really for me 40k. So let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with me? Have I said something you completely disagree? I'm obviously preaching a little bit to the choir and saying that, oop, we're in a little bit of trouble, so I get some of you might not be overly thrilled with me at the minute. But I do think many people will enjoy Shatterpoint. I hope you are one of them. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.